Hello, everyone. This is Karen Brosnahan, Managing Director of HR Services. On behalf of Jim McSweeney and all of us here at the CIP Group, welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is about the Mass Paid Family and Medical Leave Law and the latest proposed regulations by the state. And we're very happy to have Dave Wilson back as our presenter today. Dave is the founding partner of Hirsch Roberts Weinstein, a preeminent employment law firm in Boston. He'll be sharing valuable and important information, and we know you'll benefit from his expertise. Some quick notes for all of you, please. We will be recording today's webinar, and it'll be available on CIP's website, askcip.com. If you have questions during the webinar, please enter them in the question pane located on the right side of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can in the time allowed. So with that said, thank you for joining us today. And Dave, you can take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Well, let's get right to it. We've got a lot to cover, and I want to allow some time for questions. So first is, what are we talking about here? This is the new paid family leave law is much like an insurance program, like unemployment or short-term disability. We're going to get payroll. There's a payroll tax that the employer and the employee share. It goes into a trust fund, and then it will be paid out in partial wage replacement in different situations. So if we go to the next slide. Let's see if I can do it. There we go. All right, so what are the basics? This is a lot like unemployment in the sense that we're taking a payroll tax and in return offering benefits. So there'll be 12 weeks of paid family leave. There'll be up to 20 weeks of paid medical leave. Again, up to 26 weeks of paid military caregiver leave. And again, this is only partial wage replacement. It'll be about 64% of an employee's normal weekly pay, and there's a cap after 26 weeks. The regulations, last Friday, the second draft of the regulations came out. There were a ton of changes from the first, and I would say almost all for the better. And the last thing to remember is that there is sort of job protection. So if we look at the timeline here's where we stand right now. The original regs came out on January 23rd. On last Friday at about 5:52 p.m., they came out with the updated regs. April 29th is the date for approving a plan for applications to employers if they want to be exempt or opt out of the plan. I don't think that many are going to want to do that. The final regs will come out on July 1st, and that's also when employers need to start taking payroll deductions in the next pay period after that. The first round of contributions need to be sent by employers to the Commonwealth on October 31st. And benefits, we're going to fill the pipeline, so the benefits won't even start until not this coming January, but a year from this coming January. And then finally, those will be the medical benefits, and then family leave benefits, and all the benefits start on July 1st of 2021. So that's sort of the basics. Now, who is eligible in these situations? Well, you have to, an employee to be eligible, they have to, in the past 4 calendar quarters, remember each calendar quarter is a 13-week period, and they have to earn wages equal to 30 times the weekly benefit they would receive, and also have earned at least $4,700 in the past 4 quarters. So you can see that the bar is fairly low. All right. Now, who is actually eligible in these situations? And this is one thing that has employers scratching their heads a little bit, but it's not only your current employees, but it's your former employees who were separated within the last 26 weeks. Now, think of this like unemployment, right? So if you laid me off in December, unemployment looks back for the whole year and says, okay, anybody who employed me during that year is going to help contribute, or they put money in and I put money in, and they're going to help contribute. So to my unemployment payment. So in the same way, you may have former employees. Well, they've already paid into the system under you, and so they are eligible. If you're self-employed and you elect to join and start making contributions, you are also covered. If you elect not to join, then you're not. And then here's another thing. Any of you out there that have 50% of your employer workforce are independent contractors, then those independent contractors would also be eligible, and you'd have to make payments for them. All right. So I can get to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, and so what is the amount that you're going to pay? And the way they calculate it is a little funny. It's 80% of an employee's wages plus 50% of the wages beyond the average weekly wage in Massachusetts. But there's a cap of $850. So this slide's a little confusing because it describes what the law describes, but let's really look at what that means in terms of different employees. If I make $26,000 a year, my weekly pay is $500 a week. My benefit would be $400, and that's 80% of my wage replacement. But look, as my pay goes up, and the $1,284.96 is the current average. Oh no, it's not. The current average weekly wage is the $1,383.41 up there. But look, as my pay goes up, the percentage of my wage replacement goes down. So if I'm making $104,000 a year, it's only actually going to replace 42.5%. So this isn't a situation where your wealthier workers, it's going to be a huge benefit to them, although it will be some benefit to them. But the idea of this law was really to protect those at the lowest pay scales here in the Commonwealth. And look at somebody making $200,000 a year, it's only going to replace 21% of their weekly wage. So you can see this law is really geared toward folks at the lower levels. So what can I get? How do I qualify for medical leave? Well, I have to have an illness, injury, or impairment that involves inpatient care in a hospital, hospice, or residential facility, or that I'm getting continuing treatment by a healthcare provider. And a healthcare certification in this situation would be sufficient from an employee if it contained the date, the probable duration of their situation, and what the law calls appropriate medical facts. The legislation directs the Family and Medical Leave Department to define what those appropriate medical facts are, and we're sure that they'll be doing that between now and July 1st. Let's look now at, so that was for medical leave. For family leave, here's the list of qualifying purposes, right? To bond with a child in the first 12 months after their birth, adoption, or foster care placement, to care for a family member with a serious health condition, or due to a qualifying exigency related to somebody's medical service. I'm sorry, military service, like they've been injured and you have to care for them, or they've just gotten called up, or they've just returned from duty. So when you compare the family leave eligibility rules to the FMLA, what we realize is that the state definitions are a little bit broader than the FMLA. And one example of that would be who are covered family members. And under the FMLA, spouse, child, or parent in loco parentis are the covered family members. But under the mass paid family leave, the titles in blue are also. So if you're a parent-in-law, a grandchild, a grandparent, a sibling, or a domestic partner, now you would also, an employee would be covered if they wanted to take care of those folks as well. So measuring the leave year, and we have a little assignment, and we're going to see how folks did on that. But basically what the law says is it's the 52 weeks beginning on the Sunday before the person asks for the leave. It's a measure forward method under the FMLA, not the rolling back method. And we've always used a 12-month look back, and that's what we'd recommended previously to our clients. But we think that with this law going in, you're probably going to want to change your FMLA policy so it's consistent with the paid family leave, and from now on, use a rolling forward method. And we don't recommend you using the calendar year anymore. Under the FMLA, you could do that, but you can't do that under the paid family leave. So what does this all mean? Let's look at a real situation. And there was a handout that was sent out a week ago, and we hope that you folks did your homework. And if you did, pull that out and let's go through it, because I've got the answers here. So Rocky requests his paid family leave on October 15th, 2021. And you'll see that we had in the handout a calendar. So if you looked on that calendar, the Sunday before October 15th, 2021 was October 10th of 2021. So that's when Rocky's leave began. When would it end? It would end 365 days later, or basically October 9th of 2022. Now, Rocky took 14 weeks of medical leave, and then he took 12 weeks of family leave, so that hits the cap of 26 weeks. Rocky then requested 3 more weeks of medical leave to begin on 9/15/22. Was he eligible for that? He would have been, but he's not, because he'd already used up all 26 weeks. But then Rocky then requests 10 weeks of family leave effective 11/14/22. So now past that first year. Is Rocky entitled to that time? Yes, because he's in a new benefit year at that point. And again, you would look, he requested leave on 11/14. You look back on the calendar, and the Sunday before is 11/13/2022. And his leave, his new leave year would end on 11/12 of 2023. So we hope if folks had questions about any of that, we can cover that in the questions. But that was really just following the rule of the 52 weeks beginning the Sunday preceding, and remembering that there is a cap of 26 weeks in the benefit year. So if there are any questions of that, we can cover those. What are some of the additional details under this law? Intermittent leave is available on a prorated basis, except for birth, adoption, and foster care placements, unless the employer agrees. If the employer agrees to allow some intermittent leave for an employee for the birth, adoption, or foster care. Again, there's always a 7-day waiting period applicable to all the pregnancy-related conditions. Again, for all these leaves, there's going to be a 7-day knockout period where folks are going to probably want to either use their sick time or their PTO, depending on the reason for the leave. Employers, we have a written notice and posting requirements, and on the Department of Family Leave Medical website, they just came out with a poster, which you can, and I have the link at the end of this presentation so you can go to it. The website is actually very good, and they keep updating it and improving it. But that poster should be, you should be printed out and posted with all your other posters on or before July 1st. It wouldn't hurt to do it now. And then there's a 30-day notice of employees are required to give a 30-day notice of their leave if they actually know it. Okay. Then what about other employer policies? Again, you need the paid leave has to be provided the same or a higher rate by employer counts against the employee's leave allotment. So, for example, you want to make sure that employees are getting the best deal either under your policy or under this law. So if your policy wasn't as generous as this law, you're going to need to update that. Now, one thing that's interesting, the law makes it very clear that employers are going to get reimbursed from the trust fund for employers that paid leave payments through their own company policy. So, for example, if I get injured and I'm out and I'm collecting under the paid family leave, but my workers' comp is also paying, or short-term disability offsets those payments, it's not clear right now if we're going to deduct that up front and have the Department of Family Medical Leave pay a lesser amount, or if there's going to be reimbursement. But either way, the employee is not going to be allowed to double dip in those situations. An employer cannot have a policy that says you first have to exhaust all your PTO before you're eligible for paid family leave. And the paid leave does run concurrently with the FMLA and mass parental leave law. Some more basics of the law. There's a presumption that must be overcome by clear and convincing evidence that a layoff or termination would not have occurred anyway. So in other words, there's job protection here, but just like in the FMLA, the employee's not entitled to any greater rights than they would have been if they hadn't exercised their rights on the paid family medical leave law. So for example, let's say I'm in the call center and there are 10 of us in the call center and 3 of us are out on paid family leave, and they offshore the entire call center to the Philippines. Well, just because I'm on paid family leave, I'm not entitled to any greater protection than if I hadn't been. And I just have to show and make that presentation to the Department of Family Leave and show them, hey, we wiped out the whole group. All right. Healthcare continuation during the leave. Again, like the FMLA, the employer is going to have to continue to pay their share of the premium. And one of the new updates that we were very happy to see in the regulations is that it said that the employee is going to have to continue to pay their share during that time period too. Again, the anti-retaliation provisions, you can't retaliate against somebody for seeking paid family leave. And we have to be careful that even after somebody comes back from paid family leave, any negative change to their terms and conditions of employment in the 6 months following their return would be presumed to be retaliatory. So again, we have to be careful on that. Now, many of you are wondering about a private plan alternative. And let's just see. The next slide, I am, let's see. It says the connection to GoToWebinar server has been lost. Please check your network connection. But why don't we move on to the next slide for those of you that can see it. It says private plan alternative. I'm hoping that's just me that lost the connection and not the rest of you. Starting April 29th, 2019, employers can apply to have their plans approved and be exempt. We're not sure that that's going to make any financial sense at any time, and we'll run through that. Yeah, Kelly or Karen, if you could advance the slides here, because that's great. Go to the private plan alternative slide. There we go. Thanks. And you'll see that when we start doing the numbers, and we're going to go through a couple of examples of what it costs us to have all our employees on the plan. You'll see that that's probably going to be, we think anyway, that that's going to be a lot cheaper than a situation where you go on a private plan and you are paying for your employees medical leaves and the like. And you could have a private plan for both the family and the medical leave, or just one of them. All right. Oops. Sorry. I think I got my connection back, so it's working. All right. So there's a concern about that this is really expensive. Well, it depends on what you consider expensive. So we're going to actually look at that and do a couple of examples. So the trust fund, by law, has to maintain annualized amount of not less than 140% of the previous year's expenditures. So that's why it's taking 18 months to fill the pipeline before they allow anybody to start spending it. Some estimated the annual cost at $800 million. Your contribution rate is going to be 0.63% for the first $132,900. That's the Social Security amount. So let me give you an example. If I make $100,000 a year, you're going to take 0.63% of that, or $630 of it in my for my year. If I make $140,000, you'll only take 0.63% up to the $132,900, and after that, you're not going to take any more. Okay, so who's paying for this, and how is it working? So 0.63% contribution rate is split between the employer and the employee on the medical leave, where the employer pays 60 and the employee 40. And for family leave, the employee is going to pay 100%. If you actually break down this 0.63%, if the employer has the employee pay the family leave section, and now the employer could choose to pay all of this themselves, the whole 0.63. But if they break it down the way the law does, it works out that the employer will pay about 32.32 or 32 cents on the for every, I get my math right here. So on a dollar, it would be 0.32 cents. On $10, it would be 3.2 cents. On $100, it would be 32 cents. That's what it is. And the employee would be paying about 31 cents. Now, employers with fewer than 25 employees are exempt from from paying the employer portion at all. So the employee would still pay their portion, but the employer isn't required to pay at all. This will all come out through wage deductions, just like when you look at your paycheck and you see Social Security withholding, federal unemployment tax withholding, state unemployment tax withholding. This would be another section that would be withheld. Now, I don't think here in the People's Republic of Massachusetts there are that many employers who have independent contractors, because it's really hard to be an independent contractor here in Massachusetts. But if more than 50% of your workforce were independent contractors, you would also have to withhold those funds from the payments to them. All right, so let's actually look at a real situation. You're an employer, you have more than 25 employees. So here's how the breakdown works. On the medical leave, that's the lion's share of what the payment is. And the employer and the employee are going to split that 60-40. And on the family leave side, the employee is going to pay the full 100%. So let's, and for an employer with fewer than 25 employees, what you see here is that the employee is going to pay their 11%, and on the medical contribution, the employer doesn't have to contribute their 60% at all. The employee would have to pay their 40%. So let's do some math. We gave you those handouts a week ago. We hope you had time to do them. And let's look at the green handout. So this is an employee. And that you and HR may get asked these kinds of questions from your CFO or somebody. So I've got an employee. We're bringing them on at $57,000 a year. How much does that mean that we're going to contribute into the Paid Family Leave Trust Fund? Well, the answer is the total amount that's going to be kicked in is $359.10. And what's the breakdown on that? Well, if you look to the right on the family leave contribution, the employee is going to pay $62.70 themselves. So divide that over the 26 pay periods. That's about $2, a little over $2 every paycheck. And then on the medical leave side, the employer over the year is going to pay $177 and the employee $118. And you see, if you add up what the employee is paying, the employee and employer are virtually paying almost the same amount. Here, the employee is going to be paying $180, and the employer is going to be paying $177. So that's the type of breakdown that you see. So when you divide that over a 26-week pay period, it's very short money coming out of each paycheck. So what about an employee or with fewer than 25 employees? Let's take the same example. And in that situation, what you see is the employee is paying in their $180 and the employer is paying in nothing. So what does that mean? That means that larger employers are going to be subsidizing the smaller employers in Massachusetts. Okay. Now let's look at the next hypothetical. And this is for when you can be smart and go into your CFO, or if you haven't already gotten this question, you will, which is, what's this going to cost my company? And so in this example, we took a company and look in the upper left-hand corner, they have a payroll of 13.5 million, and they have 460 employees. Now, when we did this calculation, the total amount that they would pay over the year for the whole company is $85,000. We assumed that it's a socialist company, and nobody is paid more than 132,900. So if you have employees paid above that amount, we would lower this payroll amount by whatever that difference is, because remember, we're only taking, if an employee is making $200,000, we're still only charging them against the first 132,900, which is the Social Security amount. So let's break this down again. The employer would come up, the medical leave contribution is $70,000. The employer would pay 60% of that, or $42,120. The employee would pay 40% of that, or $28,0808. And remember, these are all the employees together. On the family leave side, the employee's total amount would be $14,850. And remember, that's divided over 460 employees. So again, the numbers are relatively small. So what is this costing the employer? If they choose to pay 100% of everything, it's costing them an extra $85,000 on a $13.5 million payroll. Or if they only choose to pay the share the law requires them, they're only paying $42,000 on a $13.5 million payroll. So yeah, is it something? But it's not the kind of money that is probably going to break the bank. I'll give you one more example. Here was another client of ours that shared their payroll information. So they have a $9.7 million payroll and 144 employees. And again, if you look, the total amount that they're going to pay is $61,000. That's actually the highest it would be. I assume they have employees making over 132, so we subtract out, that total payroll number would be smaller. And then again, the employer is only paying $30,000 of the medical, the employee $20,000, and again, the employees on the family side, $10,000. So what are your responsibilities coming up? And the website is fantastic, and this was an update from yesterday's website. So what do you need to do between now and be ready to do on July 1st? Well, you're going to be responsible for, starting on July 1st, reporting wages paid, payment for contract services rendered if you're using independent contractors, and provide other information about your workforce. There's going to be an online web portal that you go to where you will fill out the report and put this information in. And there'll be more information on the department website about that. You're going to determine the contribution amounts for your workforce. You have to decide, are you going to pay just 60% of the medical, or are you going to pay 100% of everything? And as an employment lawyer, I would counsel you to figure out whatever you decide to do. It's going to be hard to change. So if you decide you want to be generous right now and pay 100% of everything, and then when times get tough, if you take that away, that's the way employees are going to see it. So think hard about how you want to handle it. And there's no right answer, but just don't be in a situation where you're giving it now and then you're going to take it away later. And then finally, making deductions to cover the workers' contributions. It's either going to come out of their W-2 pay or on the 1099. And then another thing that's important is notifying the workforce about the law. So on the one hand, we're going to have the posters that you're going to put up and maybe hand them out to all your employees. But there's an acknowledgement form. The department hasn't come up with one yet. And if they don't soon, we'll come up with one and provide it to CIP group for them to share. So now we've got a polling question for the group, and just trying to understand what your concerns are out there about the system. And so select all that apply to you. Okay, and maybe we can show the results of those polls once we get enough people in there. All right. And Carrie, can we publish those results? Maybe not.
We're having technical difficulties on publishing, but about 66% are saying that employee abuse of the system is their main concern. 51% is employer contribution costs, 53 is labor shortages, and 47 labor costs.
Got it. All right, so they're all high. Thank you for that. Let's see. Wait, I think I've got a couple more slides here at the end. Okay, so again, we talked about the notice requirement is important in that there's going to be penalties for employers not getting the word out. So why does the state care so much about this? They want to make sure that every employee knows what their rights are when this law comes out. So the poster's not enough. We're going to want a written acknowledgement that they've gotten notice of it, because if they later claim they didn't get notice of it, the state's going to come to us, and having a signed acknowledgement from them is going to be our get out of jail free card. So we want to make sure that we're on top of that. What is the timing on the rest of this? Again, we've got, they're going to, we just got the second draft of the regulations. Contributions are starting to be collected on July 1st. January 1st, 2021, the benefits for bonding for a new child, service member, and serious personal health conditions. And then the family leave and full benefits will be July 1 of 2021. Again, I mentioned the website, and I think this is, you want to spend some time on this website. They've got a great little program, a little video to watch, and some other things. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. All right, so that leaves us time for some questions. And Carrie and Karen, if you want to
yeah, we have
some of the questions.
Yep, we have some questions from the audience. I'll read off to you. Under what circumstances would you recommend a company apply for an exemption or opt out?
Great question. Well, I think you should do the math to see if it makes any sense. So I've told you what it's going to cost you on this front. I think what we need to do is go out and ask the insurers what it's going to cost on what are they going to charge us to provide something that's at least as good, if not better. Because in other words, in order to get the exemption, it's going to have to be a better deal than the state's already giving us. Now, we did some back of the napkin calculations on this. Let's say I have 250 employees, and at any one time, we talked to one of our clients who has 250 employees, and at any one time, they usually have about 6 people out on leave, which doesn't sound that bad. Well, so it's about 2% of their people, because it's a physical job they're in. But the amount that we would pay in medical coverage and wage replacement for those 6 people would far exceed what we're paying for the whole company under the paid family leave. So I guess my answer to your question is you need to look and do the math. I've given you one side of the math, and now you need to look to see what's out there. But I'll tell you, I know New York adopted paid family leave, and all the insurers that jumped in the first year got crushed. They all took a financial bath. So I think that I'd be surprised if there's a better deal out there. There might be, though.
All right, our next question. Are employers going to be reimbursed by the state for an employee that they will have to hire to cover any employee that takes the medical leave?
No. No, there's nothing.
Okay.
Nice thought, though.
Yeah. Next question. Does this apply to employers outside of Massachusetts which have employees working in Massachusetts? Do they need to contribute to the fund for the Mass-based employees? If not, are Massachusetts-based employees able to pay in for themselves, similar to independent contractors?
Great question. And this is an area where we thought they needed to be clearer in the regulations. But our understanding is if you work in Massachusetts, regardless of where you live, if you work in Massachusetts and you are paying into the trust fund, then you are going to be covered, right? So if I could be a Delaware corporation, but if I'm doing business in Massachusetts and paying my employees in Massachusetts, then they are going to be covered regardless, but it's only my Massachusetts folks that are going to be covered. I might have 1,000 people in New York State. They don't have to be covered. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. There's another kind of a spin-off question to this someone else had. We have workers in more than one state. Do we offer disability in one state and not the other?
Well, you have the option of offering it everywhere, but you have to at least offer to the Massachusetts folks either this plan or a plan that is as good or better.
Okay. Is the income taxable?
Great question. We're not sure. They've been unclear on that. But I think that, think of it as the way when people collect unemployment insurance. I believe that's taxable. And so I think this will be too.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have a question. We have a question about determining the size of the group, whether or not it would be in excess of 25. Would you include affiliated groups with the ownership of an entity? For instance, if a restaurant had less than 25 employees, but had a 50% affiliation with 2 other organizations, how would that be calculated?
Well, again, I think it's going to come down to federal tax ID number and payroll. So what they want you to look at is your payroll over the past 4 quarters and what is the average of that payroll been. And if it's above 25, then you're going to be required to pay into the fund. If it's not, then you're probably not.
So it'd really be based more on separately in distinct federal ID numbers, you think?
Yes.
All right, another question. If you don't have 50% independent contractors, do you still include independent contractors in the payments, or is it only if 50% or more are independent contractors?
That's great question. My understanding is that you only have to withhold that if they make up more than 50% of your workforce. But I'm not precisely sure, and I will find out.
Okay. When determining 50% of employees as contractors, do you use the wage money or the number of people?
Well, I think it would be the number of people, not the money.
All right, let's see. Does this apply to union employees?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Who is considered an employee? Full-time, part-time, seasonal for purposes of calculating the 25 employee threshold?
Great question. Employee is defined as anybody in those situations. It says the statute says employee as defined under Chapter 151A, Section 1. If you look to the regulations, they define employee as all those, full-time, part-time. Where is it here? Okay, employee shall have the same meaning as 151. Yes, it's all those. If they're on your payroll and they're paying into the system from your payroll, again, think of it like unemployment. If they're on your payroll and they're paying into the system, then they are going to be eligible.
Okay. When talking about employees out of state, what about contractors that reside out of the state of Massachusetts?
Well, if they reside, see, the law talks about being employed in the Commonwealth, and if they are not employed in the Commonwealth, then I don't think you're going to have to count them.
Okay.
So that's my answer.
Okay. All right. Next question. The PFML website reads, depending on how many covered individuals you had in the last calendar year, you may also be responsible for paying a share of the acquired contributions this year. Are you looking at the number of employees at a specific date or at any time in the previous year?
I believe any time in the previous year. That's the way they're going to look at it.
Okay. Let's see. A couple of these are repeats. Let me. If I understand correctly, an employee would be out of work for 26 weeks, which is 6 months. How does this work for a child care industry that is ran by state regulations with ratio being set for teacher to children? We look for consistency for families and children. Any loopholes here for the child care industry?
I'm not aware of any loopholes for the child care industry. No, it's definitely going to be harder on some of the industries, hospitals where there's ratios required. Same thing with the child care industry. Yep.
Okay. If an employee is paid for work in more than one state, how do you manage the allocation? For instance, if an employee works 40% in New Hampshire and 30% in Mass and 30% in Maine, how would that be reported and covered?
Good question. You know, under the sick leave law, it was if 40% was Mass and 30 in the others, then you would be covered. Under this law, again, if they're employed within the Commonwealth, and they are some of the time, this is an area that is most up in the air. We gave a webinar to about 400 people, and we got this question about 70 times. So we are still waiting for an answer on that on the multi-state. So I'll look into that and try to provide an answer.
All right, and the last question so far is there any resource for an employer if they work in an industry that is already at a nationwide shortage for the workforce? In other words, if they cannot actually operate due to not being able to hire another employee that has required for credentials due to the employees who take their medical leave, are there any resources available for them?
It's a great question. If there are, I'm not aware of them at this time.
Okay. Okay. And then there's a lot of questions out here so far in regards to payroll companies. And will they provide calculating the tax?
Yeah, I think they're all learning and scrambling to do this as well, but it's not going to be rocket science on withholding that tax, just the way it's going to become another withholding, legal withholding, and what the employer needs to decide between now and July 1st, or sooner, probably by June 1st, so you can tell your payroll company is how much are you going to be responsible for it, and how much are you going to have your employees be responsible for?
That's it for questions that I see that's come through. If anyone else has other questions, if you want to put them in now or raise your hand.
I think that may be it, Dave.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And I will try to get back to you on the answers on the independent contractor and the multi-state, and then you can share those.
That is terrific. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dave. We really enjoyed it. It's very informative. And thanks to everyone who attended. Hope you have a great day.